What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the channel. My name is Michael. I hope you are having an amazing day. It's a good day when you wake up, you go down to your computer, you look at YouTube and you see that Sabaton History or Sabaton released a new video. This time it's Sabaton History, and it's a Swedish Trilogy Part 3, Return of the King. Super excited to check this out. Be sure to drop a like, subscribe, and let's check it out.
Return of the King.
The burning roof collapsed. Looking out the window, Swedish King Charles XII, Karl den Tolfte, spotted thousands of Turks and Tartars waving their swords, taunting, "Ironhead, come out and surrender." It was very much a case of, how did I get into this mess? Well, it began back on June 28, 1709. What was left of the finest army in Europe had quit the battlefield of Poltava. The defeat there, which we saw in the episode Poltava, had turned into a disaster. 5,000 Swedes had perished on the battlefield, and the remaining army of 14,000 utterly exhausted and demoralized men had been cut off by their Russian enemy. Swedish King Karl had been lucky enough to not only survive, but also to escape capture. Many of his loyal officers had paid with their lives in the final melee with the Russian cavalry to save their wounded king. With just 1,500 men, Karl rode south, down the river Dnieper, looking for safety. Relentlessly pursued by his enemies and fatigued by the harsh summer sun, they crossed the steppes into Ottoman territory near the Black Sea. A delay at the fortress of Oshakau, where the local pasha haggled over the price of passage, cost Karl a further 800 men of his rearguard to his pursuers. It seemed that one thing ruled this land more than anything else: money. His band continued its journey until they reached the mighty Ottoman fortress of Bender on the Dniester, one of the most strategically important strongpoints in the whole region. Far away from Sweden, Karl tried to be an example to his men. Despite a major leg wound which caused him terrible agony, he exuded optimism, assuring his soldiers that the fortunes would soon reverse once more. Indeed, the Swedes suddenly enjoyed a level of comfort, safety, and luxury they hadn't experienced in the last couple of years. Karl was a personal guest and friend of Sultan Ahmet III, not just because of his royal status, but because Sweden was the enemy of the Ottomans' great enemy. Both the local Khans as well as the Ottoman pashas hated the Russians, and their empires had crossed swords several times in the past. Karl would, in fact, spend years in a luxurious mansion protected by a Janissary honor guard. He kept his own court and kept himself informed about the situation in Europe through a number of exiled Swedish and Polish noblemen. Each morning, he held religious service and exercised his little army afterward. For his Turkish hosts, he was quite the attraction. It is said that thousands traveled to Bender each day just to get a glimpse of the famous Northern Paladin. Many Muslims were impressed by his demeanor, many on the verge of idolatry, for Karl was a man who did not enjoy women or alcohol, who despised luxury and splendor, but was instead devoted to his religious beliefs. And it also helped that he still managed to be a big spender without any sense for money. This to the dismay of his officers, who had protected the treasury at Poltava with their lives. Well, they didn't have unlimited funds anyhow, and began racking up local debts as the treasury was depleted. But not just financially. As his stay grew ever longer, Karl became more and more of a burden to the Ottoman Empire in other ways, mainly because the Swedish king liked to involve himself in its politics. The outbreak of the Russo-Turkish War of 1710 was more or less started by Karl. Both the Ottomans and the Russians had been at each other's throats for decades, but during the Great Northern War, Karl had dismissed an actual Swedish-Turkish alliance against the Tsar. In late November 1710, Sultan Ahmed demanded on Karl's behalf that Tsar Peter not just give in to Ottoman demands, but also evacuate the territory he had conquered from the Swedes. Peter, of course, refused, so an army of 100,000 Ottomans and Tartars led by the Turkish Grand Vizier was set to march. The victory at Poltava had made Tsar Peter a bit overconfident, and he set out with a much smaller force to meet his local allies in Wallachia and Moldavia. But just as Karl had been fleeced for money, Tsar Peter would soon experience the self-serving interests and questionable loyalty of the local elite. By the time the armies met in 1711, the Ottoman force had doubled.
Wow.
At this site, the Wallachians promptly changed sides, and Tsar Peter found himself suddenly trapped in his own realm. Encircled and cut off from retreat, it seemed like the Russians were doomed. All that was needed to change the course of history was the command for the Ottoman legions to attack, which never came. What came instead into the Turkish camp were wagons loaded with gold and a promise of a lasting peace between the two empires. An offer only a complete fool would accept. But the Grand Vizier must have been such a fellow, and Peter was allowed to leave and fight another day.
Question is that the right decision, or do you just crush the army like you should? I mean, you have the advantage, but it's hard to win at that point.
Tensions between Karl and the High Porte, the Ottoman government, grew. By mid-1712, 5 Grand Viziers had been overthrown, and the war against Russia restarted for the third time, in large part at Karl's urging. The Sultan wanted him to leave, offering to guard his journey back to Sweden, but Karl refused. A Swedish king would not be chased away like cattle, he said. He reminded the Sultan of his promise to recapture his territory, but also feared that the Ottomans would betray him on the way home. Karl became known as Ironhead as much for his martial cunning as for his stubbornness. On February 1st, 1713, his daily divine service was suddenly interrupted by the noise of cannon fire and cries of Allah, Allah. When the Swedes rushed to the windows, they saw hordes of Turkish and Tartar soldiers storming their camp. Karl ran out of the house and jumped onto his horse. Full of rage, he saw that many of his soldiers had already laid down their arms in fear of the mob. Karl drew his sword and declared, "All who have still a spark of loyalty in their breasts, follow me." With a group of his most loyal men, he charged headfirst into the crowd. Hacking with his sword, the king was soon thrown from his horse and grabbed by a huge janissary. Kicking him away, he was nearly killed by a pistol shot that grazed his head. Now missing an eyebrow and part of his left ear, he rushed back into his house. But the janissaries were already inside, eagerly looting the place. A deadly brawl ensued in the salon. Karl and his men cut their way through the house, throwing the attackers back out of the windows. In a few moments, the rooms were full of smoke and fire. 3 muscular janissaries suddenly surrounded the king, trying to take him alive. 2 of them Karl ran through with his sword, then parried the scimitar of the third at the last moment. Losing part of his thumb and forefinger, Karl swung, cut his enemy down. Just then, he was tackled by another assailant who pressed the monarch against the wall. Struggling for his life, it was the king's cook who jumped to the rescue, pistol in hand. Shouting a badass one-liner that is now lost to history, the cook shot the enemy dead and saved his king. After clearing the salon, the Swedes stormed Karl's bedroom. Furiously, Karl kicked down the door, stabbing the first 2 startled enemies before they could fire their guns, and dragging a third one out from underneath his bed. By the afternoon, the house was finally empty of the enemy again. Well, except for all the enemy corpses. But now, the mob was throwing burning bundles of wood onto the roof, which soon began to burn. Outside, the crowd was yelling for Karl to come out and surrender. Proudly, the king declared that he would fight until he was either dead or captured. With a loud roar of approval, his men burst from the door. Sword in hand, the king led the charge and immediately stumbled over his own spurs. Falling to the ground, he was jumped by at least a dozen janissaries. Seeing their king dragged away, the rest of the Swedes surrendered. This whole story, which was soon to be known as the Kalabalik of Bender, spread, of course, like wildfire through the European courts. The tale that the Swedish king had defended himself with only 40 men against a horde of 12,000 and 12 cannons for 8 hours impressed friend and foe alike.
1,200.
But it also kind of meant that Karl's time in the Ottoman Empire was definitely up. Sweden's last ally in the fight against Russia was gone. Released from captivity, the king had no other option but to return home. In the years of his absence, though, the Swedish Empire had nearly ceased to exist. The other Swedish armies had been annihilated in their fights against the Danes and Russians trying to drive them from Swedish territory. In late November 1714, after 15 years away, King Karl once more stepped onto Swedish soil near Stralsund, on the north coast of what is now Germany. Overnight, the whole nation ran wild. "Behold, thy king cometh," the people rejoiced. Like a champion returning to WrestleMania, Karl cut his promo, declaring that the most righteous and heroic of princes was back and here to utterly crush his enemies. He would take back what was rightfully his, and he would exact revenge on all those who had wronged Sweden in the past. Those Swedes who had sort of hoped that their king would return to Stockholm and make peace with his enemies were soon to be bitterly disappointed. Karl demanded that a new army be raised and prepared for war. Well, we saw in the Long Live the King episode how that turned out and how the century of Sweden as a great power came to its abrupt end with Karl's death. Perhaps the return of the king is not always as glorious as one imagines.
Dang. That was a thrilling story, to say the least. Like, there's so much going on. I was gonna say make a movie out of it. You know, I'm sure there's some sort of movie or something made about this specific, you know, span of time. But interesting, to say the least.
Okay, I really liked the intro. I didn't know what it was going to be. Some of you may have noticed that at the end of part 2, it was a cliffhanger because we did part 1 was Phantom Menace. Part 1 part 1 was A New Hope, and part 2 was The Empire Strikes Back. So, and we couldn't do Return of the Jedi. That was clever, you know.
And it's a third in the series as well.
Yeah, I know. It's were you a big Tolkien fan?
Very, very big. I think I read the books 10 times.
Wow.
When you were a teenager, 20s, or
Well, first time I was a teenager.
Yeah.
I think I started it very young the first time. I had to give up after, 100 pages because it was too
complicated?
when I was really young. But then I got back into it when I was a teenager. I love it.
You know, there's a lot of flaws with different nations' educational system, and the American educational system is no different. But one thing I really was thankful for later on in life was the books that we had to read in school. I had to read The Hobbit in school. I was 12 years old. I had to read The Hobbit.
Okay.
And I loved The Hobbit. And from there, like you, I read The Lord of the Rings. Who knows how many times? Every 7 or 8 months, you just pick up one of the books again and start going. I mean, it's so good.
Yes, it is.
And actually, to be fair.
Okay, to kind of go on this note real quick, I mean, one of the things that I had to do in high school was, the high school I went to, I don't know if it's required across all the high schools, but, you know, my district in particular is, we always read before we were, you know, taught, or we did our lesson or whatever. So we read about 20 minutes a day. And at the time, you know, everybody would basically get a book. They would read the book once, and then they would pretend like they were reading it, just kind of stare at the pages and screw around. But as I got a little older, I appreciated reading more and more and more, because everybody around me was reading. My whole family was readers. They were voracious readers and just reading. So constantly learning about knowledge. And you could see where they are now. I'm seeing literally the same trajectory.
The Peter Jackson films are actually really well done.
I like them as well. Yeah. Even the very hated Hobbit trilogy, I like.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. But it was weird. To me, the only thing that was weird about it was making it into a trilogy.
Yeah, it could have been two. Could have been 2 movies.
I mean, because in size, it's the size of around 1 or a bit less than 1 of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Yeah. So, what about the Silmarillion? Are they going to do that as a movie? Or any of the other?
To be honest, I hope not. I think the book is boring as fuck.
Well, it doesn't have the one ring to rule them all. It does, but not in its earlier form. So, Wait, what is it? One ring to rule them all, one ring to bind them, one ring
Find
to
them.
find them. No, isn't the darkness bind them? Yeah, and in the darkness find them. So, hey, there's some history.
Yes.
No, you're not gonna do a song about it.
We actually did a song about Lord of the Rings.
You did?
Wait, what?
So called Shadows. Well, actually, the first song that I ever wrote for Sabaton. We weren't even called Sabaton, and it's on the Metalizer album.
Okay.
And the Fist for Fight demo. Yeah, the first song was about Lord of the Rings.
Wow.
Can we play a little bit of it?
I certainly hope not.
Either right now, when I'm looking like this, listening for the music, either right now they've inserted the sound of crickets chirping, and like a thing that says technical difficulties, technical difficulties, technical difficulties, or they're playing it.
Oh my gosh. That's so cool that they actually did a Lord of the Rings song. I'm definitely checking this out.
But okay, well that was Sauron's hopeful empire, right? But he never really got to expand beyond the mountain, beyond Mordor.
Nope.
Well, like Mordor.
Mordor.
They have to say it like that. Hey, Steve. Yeah. Hey, you and Jose and Dave. You guys want to go to Mordor with me? We're going this afternoon. You have to say it like that. That's how it is. Okay, but anyway, anyhow, back to the actual Swedish Empire.
Yes.
Now, what was the reception for you covering this particular period of Swedish history?
Let's say national Swedish television wanted to portray us as Nazis and stuff like that.
And why?
Because that, for some reason, no logical reason, but this period of Sweden is usually used by right-wing extremists.
Okay.
And,
because this is what we used to be. We were great. Yeah.
I think every nation has some part of their history that whichever political group will sort of latch onto and try to make their own. And thing is with us then, and also to make it even worse, we were singing the national anthem at Sweden Rock Festival and played on the national day, that being said. So Swedish National Day, they asked us if we wanted to perform the national anthem and a few songs. And we thought, yeah, it's nice because we got tickets to a great festival.
Yeah, sure.
So, and that, of course, made it to actually national TV news in Sweden.
But the national anthem was on at the end of the night, every single night, 7 days a week on TV.
Yep.
And that's not because of right-wing extremism.
No. No, but it was actually a bit of a media, not shitstorm, but a bit of a minefield for us.
Well, how did it go? What kind of things did people say? How did you defend yourself? What was the...
Actually, luckily, these days, a lot of our fans, thank you for those of you, you know who you are helping to defend us, because we might be called warmongers, glorifiers of war, anything that ends with
war. You do the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obvious as well, but...
Well, what he's saying is on the PC, correction, or the PC environment that we live in right now. I mean, they're literally saying history as it is. We've heard, at least I've heard tons of times them telling, tell history how it is. We're not trying to interject or inject our opinion into it. I mean, it's just, to me, that at this point, it's ridiculous that people are like this. Like, this is history. It happened. Times were different back then. We can't relate. Obviously, hindsight is 20/20.
I mean, take one lyric line from one song, and you can make us look like anything.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But in Sweden, in particular, this is a touchy subject, which is kind of funny because we had, for several years, been singing about Nazis and stuff, and nobody cared. And then we sang about 100-year period of Swedish Empire, and then people are starting to ask us, are you Nazis? Never mind the fact that we've sung the word Nazi 50,000 times before in our career. But no, but I mean, the weird thing is, we had, not our 15 minutes of fame in national television in 2012, and in magazines where people media insinuated that we were like that. Because if we sing about being Swedish, singing about the Swedish Empire, you must be.
But you also sing about the decline and fall of the Swedish Empire.
Yes, we do. And what fucking cunts Sweden were in certain,
Colorful choice of words there, Joachim.
Yes, thank you. But Vishwa.
You can understand to a certain extent some of the print media, like sure, Aftonbladet and Expressen, like the tabloids thing. It's sensation. It'll sell. But the more respectable papers say
actually they were better than the national Swedish radio and TV.
Yeah?
Yeah. Which is weird. But no, I would say I think, I can't remember, it was Aftonbladet actually who were the first to let us actually comment back on any such topic,
Well, does it? And it's still. That's funny that it still haunts you a little bit to this day. I don't suppose it really affects things like tours. And record sales,
no, not really. But I mean, you can see that there's this. Not that people are convinced. They just remember hearing about it, Sabaton being right wing, 10 almost or 8 years ago now, and that's still in the back of their heads. And we still not had problems with it, but we when we are going, let's say, working with anything Swedish, in many cases we have to explain ourselves and show them, and I mean it takes 5 minutes. We're used to having to explain ourselves by now.
Yeah.
But it's kind of weird, actually. That's what Sweden got worried about. Never mind
that you're singing about
Ghost Division,
Yeah.
Singing about Rommel, that was fine. But don't you dare to sing about Carolus Rex.
Swedes. But did it ever make you angry? Did you ever lose it?
No, never lose it. But getting so fucking tired of it, yes, at times, absolutely.
Would people say stuff to you in public about that, or was that okay?
Well, most people, I mean, anyone who knows us knows nobody has any, crazy ideas about glorifying the Swedish Empire and stuff. So, I mean, here in Falun, not generally. We've been around for so long. I don't think it's a big problem around here.
I suppose everybody knows somebody who knows you or knows you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that big around here.
Well, you have the festival too.
Oh, we have the festival, yeah.
How's that feel not having it this year?
So weird.
Yeah.
Because it's been we've been
That would be right around now, right?
Yeah, it would have
just
been.
so we're filming this in late August.
Yeah, it would have been 2 weeks ago, or 1 week ago, or something.
Who were the bands that were playing?
I don't remember even.
Okay. Because free publicity right now, if you do.
I know. But I got such bad memory, and I might add here to this. It sounds like a dickhead thing, but if you do, let's say, 150 concerts every year.
Yeah.
And if you do, I don't know how many festivals and the billings on those, it's only if you have a super favorite band, you remember it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I will, on a regular festival summer, we do 20 festivals. If I remember we were gonna play right before Kiss, and I'm gonna watch the show after, then I might remember,
Oh, yeah.
Other than that, I check it out before I go to the airport. Oh, let's see if there's any good bands I wanna see.
Yeah.
Because after a while, doing thousands of shows,
No,
you sort of forget everything.
I gotta admit, I haven't done a real Sabaton type festival summer since 2004, and that was with money. But we did 35 festivals that summer, and but it was all over Europe and stuff. But when people say, "Oh, well, you did," we played 9 German festivals that summer, and people are like, "Which ones?" I'm like, "I have no idea. I genuinely have no idea." Well, what towns were they near? I don't know. But I did know then. I knew where we were exactly
then. Yes. But I mean, that's a great thing about Germany and their festivals.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any other country who I've gone to cities I've never heard of.
Yeah.
And they had a super nice rock festival.
Yeah.
And
big one too.
Big one. I mean, 5,000-6,000 people came.
Yeah.
And it's like, how is this possible? And I now that you mention it, and I think back, I don't think there's any country that we have performed in that has that many smaller festivals.
Oh, the city. I do remember one little one. Well, it wasn't because it wasn't a big. I remember playing at the Osnabrück City Festival.
Oh.
And I remember it because I had never heard of Osnabrück before, and I'd lived in Europe for a while.
Yeah.
But I met a really nice girl there. Hey, hi, by the way, if you're out there. I'm not gonna say her name, but it was a long time. I got a girlfriend anyway now. Oh, sorry. I hope I'm not breaking too many hearts. I have a girlfriend at the moment. It's really cool. Her name's Emily. I met her a few months ago. Hi, Emily. This was our 3-part series on the rise and fall of the Swedish Empire. And it's interesting, the commentary about it. What is an empire? How you decided and began to do the research for the lyrics and stuff. And then finally what the reaction was, and especially the counter reaction, the you guys are Nazis reaction. Did you expect that in any way?
Yeah.
You did think that was going to happen?
We knew, obviously, being Swedish. So it's not like we can't say it came, out of nowhere. We knew we were getting ourselves into a minefield. Okay. Other artists have covered this before, and they have, who even touched the subject has had similar reactions as well. So.
Okay.
We knew sort of that we were going to run into some troubles. So we can't really say, yeah, we know we have ourselves to blame for it.
Okay. Well, I mean, you walk into it, but, well, still, it was a monumentally major step on the road that got you right here, sitting in a chair.
Absolutely.
Next to me, covered in fake green stuff. They can still see us,
That camouflage.
Camouflage, see. All right, and on that happy note, you said cunt.
And now you did too.
Okay. And on that happy note, that's it for the Swedish History Trilogy, and that's it for us today from Sabaton History.
Thank you very much.
I love the chemistry that they have between each other. I think it's just amazing, the vibes and everything going on. But, this was really cool to kind of see, Swedish history, a different side, having, a different perspective, to say the least, but it's also interesting to hear that, they're labeled this and this and this based off, their viewpoints. Like, it's really hard in today's society. You almost can't talk about certain things or, address things because people automatically assume you are this. It's like, no, I'm simply trying to learn what not to do. Like, history is meant to be learning lessons. It's just basically wisdom, and you have to grab it and learn from it. It's how you act on it. Anyways, interesting to say the least. Now I'm just rambling, but the Swedish Trilogy Part 3, Return of the King, Sabaton History. Super excited to check out a lot more Sabaton, and Lord of the Rings. That's so cool that Sabaton did it. But anyways, stay healthy, stay happy, and have a blessed day.